Hi, John Hess from FilmmakerIQ.com, and today we'll dive into the history of knockoff cinema and the mockbuster. We'll start our story at the close of the silent era. By 1927, Hollywood studio system was a well-defined industry dominated by a handful of vertically integrated players that owned both the equipment and manpower to create the movies, as well as the theaters that screened the movies to an eager public. The average cost per film ranged from $190,000 at Fox to $275,000 at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. But that was only an average, as major event movies could cost upwards of a cool $1 million, while cheaper productions could be turned around rather quickly for only $50,000. But these cheaper films allowed the studios to maximize the value they got from their facilities and personnel, to keep the stages in constant use, generating product while also serving as a training ground for new talent. Smaller major studios like Columbia Pictures and Universal Pictures focused mainly on these smaller productions with shorter running times aimed at a small town and urban neighborhood venues. Now, below these major studio players were the minors, even smaller production studios known collectively as Poverty Row. Now, these production houses focused on films where costs might run as low as $3,000. Now, unlike the majors who owned their own distribution and theaters, these productions sought profit wherever they could, booking in small, independently owned movie houses around the country. Now, when sound arrived, these independent movie houses began to adopt a new programming scheme that would come to dominate in the 1930s. Now, keep in mind, this is long before the era of multiplexes. Most theaters had only a single screen. Your ticket would buy you a newsreel, followed by a short, a serial, or a cartoon, and then a double feature. The first film of a double feature was the main event, usually a film rented from the majors. Now, being that these were independent theaters, they couldn't get a shot at the first run of these big films. That was reserved exclusively for the studio-owned theaters. So these A pictures were second-run screenings. But that's where the second film in the double feature comes into play. The B picture, often a product of Poverty Row Studios, were really inexpensive, even cheaper to rent by the minute than the cartoons or shorts. But they extended the amount of movie your ticket affords you, allowing theaters to advertise on the quantity of entertainment rather than the quality. And during the Depression of the 1930s, this was a winning strategy. Now, despite early resistance to this programming scheme, even the major studio chains began to adopt this bifurcated model and established B units to provide films for the double feature market. Out of this came the practice known as block booking. To get access to a studio's prestigious A pictures, these independent exhibitors had to buy a block of B pictures, rented out at a flat fee, often sight unseen. The price of these B pictures could be set to ensure profitability of the film, regardless of the quality or even the demand. Now, these weren't great films. Theaters would rotate the billing every few days to keep patrons coming back. Even with the major studios in the game, the demand for B pictures was insatiable. By 1935, B movie production made up 50% of Warner Brothers' output. Fox joined ranks, also dedicating half of its output to B films. Counting the 300 or so films made annually by Poverty Row Studios, 75% of Golden Era Hollywood's output was low-budget B movies. In other words, 3 out of every 4 movies of the so-called Golden Era of Hollywood were straight-up cash grabs. Most of these were westerns, but out of this we did get the hard-boiled pulp fiction crime movie, the basis of film noir. Now, no one sets out to make a bad film, a theory that we might put to the test later. But as long as the money was all but guaranteed, there isn't much, outside pride, to making the films better. Then, two major changes shook up the industry, effectively killing the cash cow. The first was a 1945 Supreme Court ruling in United States versus Paramount Pictures Incorporated, which forced the big studios to divest their holdings in the theaters and then change the practice of selling films. The guarantee of profit through pre-sold theaters was over, and the independent theaters could now have least access to the big prestigious films during their first run. And then came television. Well, this double whammy sent the movie ticket sales into a spiral, dropping 50% in the decade after 1946. The majors countered with spectacle, lavish color, 3D, widescreen, surround sound, things that you couldn't get on your set-top at home. The minors turned to sensationalism and exploitation, films that tackled the taboo, underserved niches, or just a popular special interest. And sometimes that popular special interest happens to be another popular and successful big movie. A mockbuster is a low-budget film designed to exploit the marketing and buzz surrounding a large, prestigious studio film. Now, we can't be sure when the first mockbuster hit movie theaters, as B pictures during the golden age of Hollywood were rarely written about. But this mockbuster practice of copying big hit movies probably got its legs around the end of the 1950s, especially in the horror and sci-fi genres, which at the time were staples of low-budget productions. Now, one of the earliest examples is The Monster of Piedras Blancas from 1959, a direct knockoff of Creature from the Black Lagoon of 1954 from the so-called Gilman horror cycle. The Monster of Piedras Blancas was even produced by Jack Kevin, who worked on the suit for Creature of the Black Lagoon, as well as other monsters when he was under contract at Universal International. Kevin was able to score some sweetheart deals for equipment from his former employer, as Universal was going through money troubles and wanted to help their former technicians find work in independent film. Well, after a couple unsuccessful movies, Kevin left the film business and started his own cosmetic company. Another example of early mockbusters comes in 1965's Village of the Giants, which capitalized on the giant woman craze started with 1958's Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Combining elements of a beach party, Village of Giants was directed by Bert I. Gordon, who has a string of shrinking or giant B films in his filmography, which is ironic given that his initials are B.I.G. In the late 70s, with the rise of grindhouse cinema, named after converted burlesque theaters that used to feature bump and grind dancing, we see a whole ecosystem of exploitation B films coming into being with the erosion of the production code and censorship. Roger Corman, the king of B pictures, produced Piranha in 1978, one of the many shark fish films aimed at capitalizing on 1975's Jaws, which many consider the first modern blockbuster. And then came Star Wars in 1977, which ushered in a series of space operas, including Star Crash in 1979 and Battle Beyond the Stars 1980. On the heels of Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien, the director of Star Crash, Luigi Cozzi, offered his take in the mockbuster Contamination. Now, Steven Spielberg's unparalleled track record means he often finds his work the subject of mockbusters throughout the 80s and 90s. E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Jurassic Park all spawned mockbusters, but none perhaps more laughably memorable as Mac and Me in 1988. These films, and many more which we won't list, at best could be said to be merely copying an idea. It wasn't until the 90s, when you had a fully mature home video market, did companies start using mockbusters to draft off the marketing of an event film. The first target was Disney's second golden age, Good Time Entertainment, founded in 1984 by Kenneth, Joseph, and Stanley Kerr, began originally as a distributor of public domain films. But by the 90s, their business strategy comprised of knockoff, straight-to-video animated movies like Cinderella, Leo the Lion, King of the Jungle, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Alice in Wonderland, Pocahontas the Legend, Hercules, and Jungle Book. There must not have been that much money in it because the company folded in 2005. But mockbuster animation has been alive and well with Video Brinquedo, a Brazilian CGI animation studio that picked up the slack, producing The Little Cars, Ratatouille, The Little Panda Fighter, and Tiny Robots. And now we come to the company that all of you are waiting for me to talk about, Asylum. Founded in 1997 by David Michael Latt, David Rimwawi, and Sherry Strain, Asylum started in the direct-to-video horror business. Competition was fierce, and the company could never get a solid foothold. In 2005, Asylum produced a low-budget adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which happened to be released the same year as Steven Spielberg's version. Spielberg keeps popping up, doesn't he? On the title alone, Blockbuster Video ordered 100,000 copies, significantly outselling all the company's previous films. Latt and Rimwawi began to reconsider their business model in favor of mockbusters, or what they called tie-ins. And boy, did they tie in. Asylum would go on to produce Snakes on a Train, The Da Vinci Treasure, Pirates of Treasure Island, Transmorphers, AVH Alien vs. Hunter, I Am Omega, 100 Million BC, 2012 Doomsday, Alan Quatermain and the Temple of Skulls, Death Racers, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Monster, Street Racer, Sunday School Musical, The Day the Earth Stopped, The Land That Time Forgot, Princess of Mars, The Terminators, Transmorphers Fall of Man, 2012 Supernova, Paranormal Entity, Six Guns, Mega Piranha, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, Battle of Los Angeles, The Amityville Haunting, Grimm's Snow White, Bikini Spring Break, Abraham Lincoln vs. Zombies, American Warships, Nazis at the Center of the Earth, AE Apocalypse Earth, Atlantic Rim, Hansel and Gretel, Age of Tomorrow, Android Cop, Apocalypse Pompeii, Mercenaries, Hercules Reborn, Jailbait, Sleeping Beauty, Z Nation, Avengers Grimm, Bound, San Andreas Quake, Road Wars, Martianland, Izzy's Way Home, and In the Name of Ben-Hur. And that's only the ones we have so far. But Asylum has seen some success in their original films, like the classic Sharknado, Sharknado 2, the second one, and Sharknado 3. Oh, hell no. While American mockbusters are a great source of cheesy fun, it's the international mockbusters that take the cake for pure daring and boldness when it comes to knockoff cinema. Low-budget, foreign-produced, illegitimate remakes or sequels are often only known to the locals, never to be released outside their original country. Well, that is until the internet happened. These mockbusters come from all over, from Denmark's only monster movie, Reptilicus, which was made to capitalize on Godzilla's craze in 1961.
Reptilicus, a monstrous, massive beast whose astounding appearance causes panic.
Reptilicus approaching the city. Repeat, Reptilicus approaching the city.
From Indonesia, we have the classic Lady Terminator, released in 1989, about an Indonesian spirit using the body of her enemy's granddaughter to fulfill a 100-year-old curse of death and destruction. To Mockbusters of Bollywood, 1993's Mahakal, India's take on Nightmare on Elm Street. And even Nigeria, which has no film industry to speak of and electricity is spotty at best, a small cottage industry made possible by digital video, gives us Masoyata in 2003, which is the retelling of James Cameron's Titanic. It's hard not to have at least a soft spot for some of these, as they're not much more harmless than fan films made for local audiences. But when it comes to international knockoffs, one country reigns supreme: Turkey. From Turkish E.T., Turkish Superman, Turkish Spider-Man, Turkish Star Trek, Turkish Wizard of Oz, and even Turkish Psycho. Spoiler alert, it's a musical. For economic reasons, the Turkish are kings of Hollywood mockbusters. But to me, nothing approaches the sheer brilliance of The Man Who Saves the World, otherwise known to us as Turkish Star Wars. And I promise I did not doctor any of this clip. Oh, I guess we can't show you a clip. You see, there's this Turkish network on YouTube that claims they own the rights to this movie, despite the fact that the original director blatantly ripped off shots from Star Wars A New Hope for their rear projection. Oh, and the soundtrack is literally just the Indiana Jones theme, not a cover of it, the actual recording from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now mind you, it's not the original copyright holders disputing, it's the guys that claim to own the Mockbuster. So if you want to see what is possibly the worst film ever created, Google Turkish Star Wars. There's a free English subtitled version out there which, unlike the official version from the Turkish network, is shown in the proper 4:3 aspect ratio. So, the obvious question is, how is this all even legal? Well, the success of the mockbusters are based on drafting opportunity, a term borrowed from aeronautics, which means you ride the slipstream behind a larger object to save energy, in this case, riding the marketing of a popular movie to generate sales. On animation, a big studio could spend 4 years in production with hundreds of artists, where a small studio can ride that success by churning out a film in 6 months with only a handful of artists. Large tentpole live action movies today have the same multi-year production schedule, which gives small, nimble studios like Asylum the same drafting advantage. How do they get away with it? Well, the most basic answer to this legal question is you can't copyright an idea or a title. If you want to make an animated movie about Aladdin, you can, because it's a public domain story. However, you can't start pulling in details from the Disney classic. And that was the subject of a lawsuit between Disney and Good Times Entertainment, who released their version of Aladdin in videocassette a few months before the Disney version hit the theaters. Well, the federal court settled in favor of Good Times, noting such differences as the golden mustachio genie as opposed to the blue goatee genie in the Disney version. So as long as the stories and productions are substantially different and in most cases that's a necessity because of the budget, there is no legal complication. However, producers of mockbusters have to be wary of walking the fine line into false advertising. In 2013, Phase 4 Films retitled their animation The Legend of Cirilla to ride the wave of a Disney behemoth, calling the French animated feature Frozen Land. Well, the move landed the film in court, with Disney rightfully arguing that the logos were too similar. And if you look at them side by side, Disney has a pretty strong case. The case was settled in 2014, with Phase 4 reverting back to the original title, paying $100,000 and promising to make all practical efforts to remove copies of Frozen Land from stores and online distributors. And it's not just animation. In 2012, Warner Brothers took everyone's favorite Mockbuster studio to court over Age of Hobbits. Unlike fairy tales, Tolkien's writings were exclusively licensed to Warner Brothers. Asylum claimed that they were justified in using the word Hobbit as it was a generic name. But Warner's provided evidence in the form of surveys done by Nielsen National Research Group that showed approximately 16 to 24% of survey respondents were confused about the source of Age of Hobbits. The evidence against Asylum was strong enough to win over the judge, and Asylum re-released the film under the name Clash of the Empires. Now, in the case of those foreign knockoffs with wholesale infringement, well, you can't squeeze blood from a stone. The mockbuster is a self-referential sign of a mature media culture. Where there is a large, culturally important film and there's money to be made, there will be mockbusters. But in our little exploration of the history of film, I hope you've learned that cash grabs are not unique to our or any time period. And even sometimes in the least likely of places, you can see the indomitable human spirit yearning to tell and hear stories. Stories that eventually become legends and part of our shared human experience. Be a part of that legend, or just be part of the narrative of humanity. Go out there, tell your story, make something great. I'm John Hess. I'll see you at filmmakeriq.com.